Dr. Norma McLaughlin. With my pen, I help women transform their purpose into profit. I welcome you to Noteworthy, the newest addition to my publishing platform, an extension of Chosen Pen Publishing. Within the next several weeks, we will be interviewing various authors of children's books as part of our Children's Literary Summer podcast series. Be sure to connect with us each through August 2020 on Monday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to meet our authors and to enjoy the excerpts from the books of their choice. For more information about Noteworthy Podcast or Chosen Pen Publishing, contact me at area code 910-818-6652. Now, let's meet our author of the week. And welcome to the Noteworthy Podcast.
Why, thank you.
I am so excited to have you with us today. This has been, I guess, a brainstorm of mine, but probably of yours as well, in trying to share with our students and our children, our youth, our literacy. Mm-hmm. And the program that we're coming up to share literacy is, we're calling it bedtime reading, bedtime stories, since this will air at 8 o'clock in the evenings. So hopefully right before the parents put their children to bed, they'll be able to hear you give your story. So that's one of the reasons the stories will come on separately after the end of the broadcast.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Okay,
hold on just a second. So,
okay.
Yeah, let me get into that file. So go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. We're going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself with your name, your book title, and why you chose to put it. I'll get back with some more questions after you do that. But
yeah, absolutely. My name is Brandy M. Miller, and I have 2 children's books and a coloring book on the topic of forgiveness. And there's one for girls, one for boys, and then the coloring book for anybody. So the little girl's book is Lucy the Candle, and the boy is Lucas the Candle, and then the coloring book is I Am the Candle. So, and it's just a short book on a deep topic that some might find a little dark, but it's designed for children who have been to some really dark places, and they need that kind of hope that there is something good that can come out of the things that they've been through.
Okay, and we know that forgiveness is one of my particular topics that I love to talk about. So we may talk about a little bit more about that and the significance and importance of that to children and why this book should be good for them. Why did you choose to write that? I guess that's a good lead-in to that.
Well, the funny thing is, because you asked me to. You know, I think it is a topic that's much needed for children, but I don't think I'd ever really sat down to think about how to put it into words for a kid. That journey that you take to recognizing that what has hurt you by what somebody else has done to hurt you isn't necessarily about you. It's about pain that they're struggling with and fear that they're undergoing, and they're not handling it well, and it spills out onto you.
Okay, and I think that was significant for me because of my grandchildren as well. I think that conversation that we had led from a conversation about my grandchildren who experienced some types of, well, not my granddaughter, who is very short and was always teased about being short. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to talk about that and talking about it with children and how other children may or may not understand why they're doing the bullier is not doing, why he's doing what she's doing.
Right, exactly. And I think that that's something that doesn't get explored very often. What we teach our children to do, at least for right now, is we teach them to identify that somebody's bullying them. And that's fantastic. Okay, recognize that you're being bullied. But pointing that out to a bully doesn't actually help because the bully can't see that they're bullying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The person who's doing the bullying doesn't see it that way.
And so that's a teachable moment that we as adults, as teachers, as family members, probably need some lessons in as well. And to understand why that child is bullying.
They're not seeing it that way. What they're doing is they're either seeing it as, this is just me, I'm just protecting myself from the world, or they're just passing on their pain to somebody else, somebody weaker who can't fight back. They don't see that as bullying in their own way. Like, I can give you a perfect example. When I was in 6th grade, there was a boy and his last name was Gay, and I was very immature, and he was an easy target. There was nothing the boy had done to hurt me. The boy had not done anything wrong in his life, that had done anything to me. But it just struck me, and so I started making fun of him. Well, I didn't realize the influence I had. So before long, it wasn't just me doing this. It was a bunch of other kids. And then before long, it was all 3 6th grade classes. Can you imagine 90 kids picking on this one child? He can't go anywhere that somebody isn't making fun of his last name. And he can't get away from us. There's nothing he can do to stop this. And, I should have stopped it right away. I shouldn't have started again with. But one of the reasons I kept it going for a little while was that it felt good to feel important. It felt good to feel like somebody thought my opinion mattered, because in my life, I really didn't feel like my opinion mattered. I really didn't feel like I mattered. And so this was like building up my self-esteem in a negative way, right? It took me about 2 weeks, though, before my conscience spoke up and said, you know what? This is wrong. This is not the way we want to feed our ego. And so I don't know what did it, but one day I walked out and they were all surrounding him and making fun of him, and I looked at them and I said, you know what? That just isn't funny. And I went on about my day. And within a week, it had all stopped. All of it.
Wow.
And that kind of, I allowed that to stick with me, and I allow it to remind me that I have way more influence than I think I do, and I need to be very careful with the words that I choose, because I don't know who might be following my example. And what legacy do I want to leave at the end of the day?
And that legacy is very important, not only to us, but for our families as they learn from us. I think we're seeing that in today's society, how it's what we do and what we teach and what our children learn from us, because they're not born bullies.
No, so they're not born bullies.
Have to learn that. And somewhere along the way, but you were also taught to have compassion as well, which is somewhere some of us don't teach our children, because if we did, that would be something that would be anti-bullying for them after a while.
Well, I think that part of the thing is that we often underestimate how strongly children feel and how impassioned they can be about things. We think because they're little, they don't feel as much. The actual truth is it's in reverse. They have no filter on their feelings. They feel everything.
True. That's very, very true.
And so when they're hurt, that's the only thing they feel. But we minimize it and we tell them, oh, that's not such a big deal, because we've gotten past bigger hurts than that. But for them, that is the biggest pain in their life. And when we lack compassion for the child's journey and for where they are in the moment, then we teach them a lack of compassion for other people's pain. Not because we intend to, but because it's part of human nature. We've forgotten how badly it hurt to be that age. We've forgotten how crippling that pain was for us in that moment.
And so we can conclude from that we have some lessons that we as people who have those concerns have to teach. So that sounds like another book.
Indeed. Yeah, it's a whole series of things that we don't realize from a child's perspective, how many lessons we're teaching them and how we handle their pain. Are we impatient with their struggle? They're going to be impatient with other people's struggle. If we lack compassion for their pain, they're going to lack compassion for other people's pain. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody tell a boy, for instance, stop being a sissy?
Yes.
Get up.
Yes.
Okay? That refusal to acknowledge that a boy can have pain that is real and needs to be acknowledged, then in turn leads him to tell other boys, stop being a sissy. Stop crying. Get up.
Yes.
You're not really hurting.
Yes.
Okay, so we're actually teaching him to be a bully.
Yes.
By bullying him.
By bullying him. Okay. So and that touches home, so that I think, again, as it says, something that we, as part of our forgiveness campaign, can talk to parents about. Some, and I'm sure we don't realize it ourselves, or we don't, because none of us want to raise a bully. And
none of us intend to bully our children either.
Right.
We're not sitting there trying to hurt them. What we think we're doing is teaching them how to be an adult.
Yes.
You know, get up, work past your feelings, face the moment. Yes, you're hurting, but you still have to live, you know, but we can do it with compassion and empathy. We can say, okay, I acknowledge that you're hurting, and I acknowledge that this is the biggest pain in your life at this moment. But we still have to do our homework. You know, we can't let our feelings dictate our behavior.
Sure. Okay.
So, you know, there are compassionate ways to approach the lessons we need to teach our children about how to handle their emotions. But what we often do instead is diminish their feelings, shut them down in those conversations because we don't want to hear about it, because we've got our own pain, and our own pain is so much bigger than their pain. But we have more tools and resources to address our pain than they do. And so we need to be compassionate and realize that they have those limitations, that they're not little adults. That's the biggest mistake we make. They are not little adults. They do not have all the filters we have.
So true. And I think as we continue to address the issues with the little candle, on the issues of forgiveness and the pain that the little candle experiences because of the bullying, is one step in that direction, that parents can read this book and hopefully help explain to their children what this candle is feeling and what they can do to help this candle overcome those feelings, and to address with their own children why, or the parents may need to find them for themselves why their children are bullying as well.
Right. Well, and we also in the lessons learned in the story of the candle is that God won't necessarily take away that pain. Like when we're praying for the bully to go away, that's not necessarily what God's going to have happen. You know, we often think, well, God didn't answer my prayer because he didn't make that bully stop. But that God can use that bully to bring out something beautiful in us. And so he may not take that pain away.
And that's one of the things I think that we need to also teach our children, that everything that happens for Christ followers happens for the good. So you need to try to ask God to show you what it is that he wants you to learn from that experience. And usually once we learn that, the bullying or whatever that experience may take another direction. But oftentimes we allow our children to stay in that experience without teaching them a way to get out. And as a Christian, that, you know, there is a way out, and God will provide that way out. It may not be what you want or the way you want it, but there will be.
Well, we have to look at St. Paul. How many times did he get bullied and put in prison, right?
Yes.
For the crime of preaching that love was real and that God loved you. Okay.
Yes.
That's the crime that he was committed to prison for, was professing that there is a God that loves you with infinite love and compassion, and he wants to know you deeply, intimately, and personally, and he wants to walk with you. That was his crime. And for that, he was put into prison many times over. He was beaten, he was scourged, he was stoned, you know, all kinds of things. All kinds of abuse was directed at him because people in pain weren't ready for the message he was giving. And it really had nothing to do with him. But if he'd have absorbed that pain and taken it into himself and said, they just don't like me, he could not have continued to preach that message of love.
Right. I would not have been widespread. Again, you know, everything happens for the good. God has a plan and a purpose for us. And we just have to learn to find out what that is.
And the bully is in our life for a reason.
Yes.
Every bully exists in our life for a reason. And as I posted on Facebook earlier, everything that happens to you is happening for you to transform you into the person you must become in order to take your place in the heavens. We're all meant to shine like stars, but stars don't come into being without a lot of heat, pressure, and gas.
That's so right. As bad as that sounds.
It's a nasty process for a star to become a star. And it's painful, you know,
So,
and
but
it's purposeful.
Yes, that is what we will become. Okay, well, I'm not sure what our time is here, but I think we are covering the information. Is there anything else you would like to talk about or add?
I will add that I will caution that parents may find the writing in the book dark, because dark things happen to people, to children. And I think one of the mistakes our society is making right now is shielding our children from the darkness, pretending it isn't as dark as it is. You know, we want them to stay in the light as long as possible, but that's not life. Mm-hmm. That's not reality. There's a lot of children right now who have lost people, who witnessed people dying around them.
Yes.
There are people who are being abused right now. There are children who have been through so many traumas, so much abuse, and so much neglect. Those children need to have their darkness acknowledged. They need for adults to acknowledge what they've been through and to stop pretending like it's all sugar and light because they're children.
Okay, well, I agree with you 100% that we need to start allowing them to see what's happening in the world around them. There's a lot happening. I know my 5-year-old grandson asks questions every day, and I'm looking at him, well, who are you? You're not old enough to ask me these types of questions.
That's the kind of thing that we need to dance away from, though, is that if we look at Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, God answered their questions as they asked them.
Mm-hmm.
As it was brought to their attention and awareness, and they asked the question, he walked with them and answered the question. That's kind of the approach we need to take as parents, not to force them to an awareness they're not ready for,
right.
But when they show readiness for it, to be willing to walk with them in that journey. And if we don't have the answers, it's okay.
Yes.
We can go look for those answers with them.
Well, that's very true. And for the last couple of weeks, with all the violence and the pandemic and all that, they have loads and loads of questions because they are seeing, you say, the new normal of what's going on in the world today. So they have to ask questions to try to make that normalized within themselves and what's happening within themselves.
The danger of not walking with them in these moments and not acknowledging their pain and not acknowledging the things that they're seeing is that they will write in their heads their own story about why it's happening. And that story is going to be based on their very limited life experience.
Right.
And the story they write in that moment will affect them for the rest of their lives. If we're not walking with them and helping them to shape the story that they form, they can write a story that can literally devastate them for decades.
That's a wonderful, wonderful thought. I hope we'll be able to get that point across because, as I say, in talking with my 5-year-old and 10-year-old, that they have thoughts. And if you're not answering them, you are so right about them making their own stories about how those things happen. And when you talk with them and they repeat their stories to you, you think, okay, well, that's not exactly
right. I mean, right? See, but they only have the one perspective.
Right.
And so when they're left to their own devices to come up with the story, they can only bring that perspective.
That's right. And they bring it. And if you don't talk to them, you just don't know what that perspective is. So I think that's a good conversation, or a conversation that we may need to continue to have with parents as we try to go through this time. That's one of the things we need to talk to your children. Not only do you need to read with them in the evening, but part of this literacy is also talking about what you are reading and trying to understand what they are comprehending from what you're reading.
That is a very important thing, to not just read to them and expect them to get what you want them to get out of it, but to try to get feedback from them on what they're getting out of the experience, so that you have a chance to step into that conversation and guide it and direct it. I think one of the biggest mistakes that parents make, and I know my mom made it, was to not pay attention to what our kids were reading, or what they're watching on TV, or what they're playing in a video game. If you aren't immersed in it with them, you can't have that conversation.
Right.
And don't expect them to understand what they should be getting out of it, because they won't. They'll take their own things out of it and form something that may or may not be true.
Yes. Well, we've unwrapped a lot, I think, here today.
Yeah, I think so. Short time on the mic, but a lot to unpack.
Yes.
A lot goes into this.
Yes.
So I do want to encourage parents to read through it first.
Okay.
For themselves, and then walk it through with their kids. Use it as a conversation starter. Even if you feel like it's a little dark, so to speak, recognize that maybe your child has experienced something that makes them feel like this darkness. It may not have been as dark as that, but it may feel that dark to them.
And I can see that when I read the book, how people, when you see children who've been bullied and they go out alone, they play alone, they stay alone, they're sitting in their own darkness. And you really don't know what's going through their minds. Well, you ask, well, why are you here by yourself? Why don't you want to play with the other children? Why are you over here eating alone? Well, those questions, and they just say, I'm okay. But there's a lot going on that we probably need to try to dig a little deeper with those children, to try to understand what that is and why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, or even acting, because usually there are always some triggers that we can see as to why they are feeling that darkness, or that darkness is surrounding them.
Well, and one thing we also, I know from my son when he was growing up, they didn't think he had any problem socializing with other kids because they saw the other kids liking him, but he wasn't receiving it that same way. Like, he didn't feel liked, he didn't feel wanted, he didn't feel connected to them. And so as a result, he wasn't feeling like he was liked. He wasn't enjoying their companionship. They may have liked him, but he couldn't reciprocate because he didn't see it that way. So just because we have to be really careful assuming that a child's okay because they act a certain way, or because other kids act a certain way to them. Kind of watch for both sides of the conversation. Is that child reciprocating? Does the child, tend to isolate themselves even though other kids may pursue them? Kind of watch for those behaviors to see, are they really adjusted as well as we think they are?
Yes, and I've seen that. And you go to them, so you go to them, you talk to them, you try to figure out what's going on with them, but often they are not receptive to a conversation. It takes time in order to develop a relationship with them, in order to get to the part where so-and-so is saying whatever he's saying to me, or treating me, or then a matter of you observing what's going on in the environment.
You're so right. It takes time to develop those relationships, and we shouldn't expect kids to trust us just because we're in their purview. Kids are like every other adult. Some kids are very trusting and very quick to tell you, but those children are usually people who have had a lot of experience with people who love them and are ready to solve their problems and help them through them. Children who come from homes where that's not the case aren't going to open up to you right away. They're going to take work.
Yeah, it takes work. It takes work. But if you work at it, you'll excuse me, get to the bottom of it. But I said, but you have to be diligent and earn that trust so that they will open up.
Absolutely. Well,
Okay.
that
Well,
is
it has just
fabulous.
been an amazing, as I was supposed to be keeping up with the time. But this is, we'd like you to go on and tell us who you are again. Give us your contact information and how
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
may get your book.
I'm Brandy M. Miller, and the books again are Lucy the Candle, Lucas the Candle, and then I Am the Candle, which is the coloring book version. And the reason we did those three is because one thing I noticed when I was going through elementary education was that kids gravitate toward things that they think are for them based on the character they see on the cover. Like if a girl sees girls on the cover, she will think it's for her. If a guy sees guys on the cover, he will think it's for him. And it doesn't matter what the title is. What they look at is the picture. And so we did one version that would speak to little girls and one version that would speak to little boys so that both could get what they needed. And then the coloring book is if they want to do an activity to go along with it, or if they want to put in their own name and make themselves the star of the story.
That's a good idea. Good idea. Okay. So we appreciate it and had a wonderful time here today with you. And if you stay tuned, just hold on for a little bit. Then once we finish with the interview, you'll be able to see Brandy or hear Brandy, see and hear Brandy read the story from
yes.
this book. And hopefully that you will be able to enjoy in the evenings with your child, it's at bedtime with us and hear her story. And as she said, take that story and explain it, listen to it, and this is a very good book for you to ask your child and have a conversation with your child about bullying and the darkness that surrounds bullying for him, but also about forgiveness. And that once that has happened, and you've identified the importance and the significance of forgiveness and why they need to forgive that other person or the bullier. And usually once that happens, relationships begin to establish because the bullier probably needs as much help as the bullying.
Oh, definitely. Bully needs probably a lot, as much intervention, if not more, than the bullied.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will, I'm sure, be chatting again as we go along through this time. We're scheduled to be from June 15th through August 15th with various authors, and it's supposed to be on Mondays, but we've got some people who are calling in, so we may be even more than that. So if you have some friends who would like to have their stories told, it doesn't have to be children, but it can be teens as well, because we have a couple of teen authors who would like to join us. Okay.
Very nice. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Norma, for having me on your show. I totally appreciate being here. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brandy M. Miller, and I am the author of a children's book that is really designed to help children who have dealt with special traumas or abuse or bullying at school come to and figure out how to deal with that in an appropriate manner and how to process those emotions. This might not be for everybody, and I encourage you to listen and watch the video and decide whether this book is for your child or not. We're going to be presenting the girls' version. I did two versions of the book. The first version is Lucy the Candle, and it is for girls, and the second version is Lucas the Candle, which is for boys. And the reason I did one for girls and one for boys is something I learned during elementary education classes, is that children gravitate toward images that reflect their gender. And they think that if it has like a boy on the cover, that it's not for them if they're a girl. And they'll think it's not for them if there's a girl on the cover when they're a boy. So to deal with that issue, we created two different versions. It's really the same book. I'm going to be reading today the Lucy the Candle book. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen so you can see the images as we go along. Lucy the Candle, a story about the power of forgiving. Copyright 2020, Brandy M. Miller, published by Chosen Pen Publications. All rights reserved. Dedication. Thank you to Norma McLaughlin, who inspired the story, and dedicated with great love to Mia Jane Miller, Hayden McLaughlin, and to all those who experience darkness in their lives. May this story encourage you not to let darkness extinguish your light or to stop you from spreading goodness into the world for as long as you live. Lucy the candle sat alone and afraid. She was the smallest candle in the box, and nobody ever picked her when they came to get a candle. She was rolled into the corner and couldn't get back to the other candles. While she was sitting there, waiting to be chosen, darkness surrounded her. It whispered to her, "Lucy, you're too weak and too small. Nobody wants you at all." Lucy hated what darkness said to her. She hated the way that darkness made her feel. "Go away, darkness," she begged. The more she tried to escape darkness, the closer darkness came. It would wrap itself around her until its voice became all that Lucy could hear. The other candles said nothing. They were too afraid of darkness to stand up to it. They didn't want darkness to come after them, too. One by one, the other candles near Lucy were taken away until Lucy was the only candle left. Darkness laughed as it watched the last candle leaving. "You're all alone now, Lucy. No one will ever come for you. They will forget you're here." Lucy didn't want to believe darkness. "It's not true," she said. But in her heart, she worried that darkness was right. Maybe they would forget her. "You're too small and too weak. You can never beat me. You'll never be able to get rid of me," darkness hissed into her ear. Lucy raised her tiny arms to her ears and closed them off tight. "You're wrong. You're wrong. I know you're wrong." She said those words, but in her heart there was a doubt. Was darkness right? Would she be trapped and helpless forever? She sent up a prayer to God. "Lord, help me defeat darkness. Don't let me be forgotten." Every day for the next week, she spoke the same words to God. "Dear Lord, help me defeat the darkness." On the first day of the next week, she started to pray those same words, but stopped. Those words didn't feel right anymore. She prayed again, but this time she changed things just a little. "Dear Lord, help me to be strong. Help me to be more like you." And just as darkness was closing in on her once again, a hand reached into the box, and she found herself being pulled out. Her heart sang. She was not forgotten. She was placed in the center of a hill of wax. Everywhere around her were small nubs of burnt-up wick. Lucy gasped in horror. Was this what had become of her fellow candles? Was this the fate she was about to meet? A voice inside her spoke. "Be not afraid, Lucy. I'm going to help you to be strong. I'm going to help you to become more like me." And with that, she heard a noise like a snake hissing, and a light began to shine. Darkness, which had followed her out of the box, pulled away from the light. Lucy was amazed. She'd never seen anything stop darkness. The light came closer and closer to her until it touched the top of her head. Lucy screamed in pain. "My head is on fire, Lord. Why have you let this happen to me?" Tears of wax rolled down Lucy's face as the fire continued to burn. But the Lord did not answer. Lucy cried. She cried so much harder than she had ever cried when darkness was taunting her and bullying her. In her misery, she almost wished that she could go back into the safety of the box. Darkness only hurt her heart. This hurt everything. Thinking about darkness, she looked around for it, afraid that it would soon come back to bully her, for she felt smaller and weaker than ever. Instead, darkness was huddled in a corner, far away from her. In the light, darkness didn't look as big as it had seemed in the box. It seemed to shrink almost to nothing. Darkness paced back and forth, as if trapped in a cage. Could it be that darkness was afraid of the light? Here I am, darkness. I'm still small and weak and all alone. Why don't you come near? Darkness frowned and turned away. I can't. I don't want to. That light in you, it burns me. Lucy's eyes widened. She'd prayed to defeat darkness. Here she was, defeating darkness with the very thing that hurt her most. Her pain was her power. Pity for darkness filled her heart. You seemed so strong, but you were weak all along. All it took was a little light and a little pain to show me how small you are. Darkness sat and hung his head. I was afraid you would leave me, just like all the others did. I thought if I convinced you of how small you were, you wouldn't notice how small I was, and you would stay. Lucy shook her head. She was sad now to learn this so late. We were both alone and afraid. You could have been my friend. Why did you choose to hurt me instead of being kind? Darkness thought for a moment. I wanted to be kind, but I was afraid you would think I was weak, and then you wouldn't respect me. I was afraid if you knew the truth, you would hurt me. Lucy looked at her hands. It isn't weak to be kind. It's harder to be kind when you're hurting, but that is what makes someone strong. A thought occurred to her just then. She'd asked the Lord to make her strong. The pain was giving her the chance to be kind when she was hurting. The light that was causing her so much grief was God's answer to her own prayer. Lucy burned all through the day and all through the night. She was hurting and in pain. She was losing wax too quickly. She knew it wouldn't be long. This time, she did not complain. Instead, she said, Lord, thank you for the opportunity to see the truth about darkness. Thank you for teaching me to be strong. Please help me to be more like you. She spoke to darkness. You don't have to be afraid. I can't promise I won't hurt you. I won't put out my light, but we can share this time together, and you won't have to be alone. Darkness snarled from its corner. I don't want to hurt. I don't want the pain. I'd rather stay over here and be alone. Lucy didn't give up on darkness. She thought maybe she could get through. The pain doesn't feel good, but I have found it gives me power. Darkness shook its head and looked away. You don't look powerful to me. Surely if you were powerful, you wouldn't hurt at all. Lucy thought about that. It is the pain I feel today that helped me to understand your pain. I'm grateful for the pain. Because of it, we can be friends. Darkness did not say anything for a very long time. Lucy was growing smaller by the minute. She knew her time was near. Soon her light would fade, and she would join the small stubs of blackened wick that clung to the hill of wax at her feet. When the last bit of wax was dripping from her, she gave darkness one final gift. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. I'm sorry to leave you alone. I forgive you for all that you did to me. You are the reason I became who I am. It's time for me to go now. It's time for me to go home. And with that, Lucy's flame sputtered out, and darkness was once again alone. It wept the tears of sadness it couldn't shed in the light, and wished it had the courage to have reached out for Lucy's hand. Lucy went up to heaven and gave God a great big hug. Thank you for helping me to be like you. Thank you for teaching me to love. Lucy took her place as a star in the heavens that day. She shines for all to see. Her friend, Darkness, is always with her. The two are never apart. It is only in the darkness that Lucy's light shines its brightest. Lucy discovered her greatest power. The thing that made her shine was the love that lived in her heart and that darkness could not devour. When darkness surrounds you and you feel small and scared, remember that Lucy still shines above. Let Lucy's light remind you to pray for the strength and the courage to love. The end. Thank you for listening and thank you for sharing this. I sincerely hope you get very good things out of it. And if you decide to purchase a copy for your child, there is a coloring book version that can go with it, and your child can fill in their own name, color their pictures their own way, and live in the story for themselves. I encourage you to pick up both the book and the coloring book and use them together.